Hello, everyone, and welcome to the November forecast. This is Gary O'Toole from Timeline Astrology. I'm going to go through the major transits for the month of November, and a reminder that I use the sidereal zodiac here. So if you're familiar with your tropical positions, then you will need to subtract 24 degrees by most standards at this point. So before we jump in, let's chant for Ganesha, the Lord of Vedic astrology, the remover of obstacles, to help us clear our minds and focus in on the planets and what they're saying for November. Om Gang Ganapatiye Namah. Om Gang Ganapatiye Namah. Om Gang Ganapatiye Namah. A reminder here that this is very individual. Transits that I refer to here are very general. So if your circumstances, i.e. the dashas, as they're called in Indian astrology, or your chart that is triggered in certain ways other than transits, that's more important that you know what dashas, what circumstances you're experiencing yourself personally, and of course, what country you live in, that's going to have an impact. And then the transits are the sort of final piece and the trigger to perhaps events occurring in your life, perhaps not. When we talk about, for example, the eclipse is not likely to actually represent anything happening in your life unless you have a planet near the eclipse degree and as well as being activated in the cycles. So one of those planets in a cycle of either the sun or moon or one of the nodes, for example, or one of the planets that is at those degrees. So if you like the video, please leave a comment. If you have any questions, just a simple TKS, thanks, would be really helpful for me for the algorithm on YouTube. And if you could hit the like button, I'd really appreciate it. And subscribe if you want to hear more about more content coming up. I've planned a lot more webinars in the coming few months and some interesting ones you might want to watch. The other thing is that patrons will always get more. I give so much more to patrons. If you become a patron, there are only a few places left because I've capped it at 100. And so you get a 27-page report, the timeline of your life, highlighting these dashes, these cycles, again, apart from the transits. And also you get access to daily reports. I write daily. Every morning I sit and write and post something for my patrons, my supporters, as well as make videos, which I call the Scorpio Video Club. So I called it that because it's all about, well, sharing the secrets of Indian astrology, the more predictive aspects of this science. You can go to timelineastrology.com. You'll find the links there, or go to patreon.com/timeline astrology. So let's jump into the transits of November. Here's the first one to talk about, or the many transits in Scorpio to talk about. So at the moment, as I record this, it's the 21st of October, and we're coming up to the new moon on the 25th of October and a partial solar eclipse. And this is in sidereal Libra. Of course, this means tropical Scorpio, which is one and the same thing. To say tropical Scorpio mostly means sidereal Libra because there's that 24-degree difference. There is a 6-degree overlap. So you could have planets at the end of a sign in the tropical, and it could move back to the beginning of that sidereal sign. So it's the same sign. But really, we're talking about two different views of the zodiac in a way. So why I'm mentioning this now is because we're shifting now after the eclipse on October 25th and the revelations and also the things that are obscured during an eclipse. We have to always be mindful of two sides of the eclipses, that things can be revealed from the hidden depths, but also things can be obscured and moved into the darkness. It's literally an eclipse of the sun. But it's not just an eclipse of the sun, it's a debilitated sun in Libra, in sidereal Libra. So the sun is in its weakest position, and then it's eclipsed by the moon. And then the moon subsequently, in the few days after that, by the end of October 27th, 28th into the 29th, moves into Scorpio, where it is itself debilitated. So we have the two lights at the end of October, the sun and moon in their weakest position. This is completely opposite to what we experience in April, around April time, when we have the sun and moon exalted. And so it's definitely a dark, quote unquote, time of year. It's quite literally moving to the darkest time of year, of course, for the winter solstice for those on the northern hemisphere. But it's dark more so in the sense of not literally, but more figuratively and experientially, because we are feeling the darkness more than anything for most people on the planet as we head into the winter. And this particular winter, which is likely to be challenging for many people on the planet, it's that sense of doom and gloom. And the sun is our light, the moon is how we reflect that light in ideally a more buoyant way when you think about the moon's interaction with the sun. But when the sun and moon both go into debilitation, we feel less than in some way. We might feel just the mood drops. We might feel energy drops as well. The sun in debilitation is our energy, our vitality. And the sun is also rhythm. And we lose our rhythm at this stage of the year because, in the summer, we might have got our rhythm going, been outdoors more, felt more energized, literally getting more sun. But even if you were on the southern hemisphere during that whole period, it's just a time when we feel the sun energy drop in Libra. And we then lack confidence and ability and assurance. And we might seek that and overcompensate in trying to overcompensate, maybe by, bigging ourselves up and making ourselves all that. But, everyone can see through that, of course. It's more telling when someone is showing off that they're actually feeling less than in some way, that they're actually looking for your reassurance. And so if you hear or see somebody showing off and being quite arrogant, we don't need to knock them any further. They're already feeling knocked down. Instead, they need to be picked up. And so this is why this time of year is really important in when the lights start to dim, whether literally on the northern hemisphere or more figuratively, energetically on the southern hemisphere or the whole world. We need to be mindful of that for everybody, not just for ourselves, that we might be feeling it ourselves, but if we can pick others up, in other words, if we can shine our light on others, if we can find our own inner light, then we can also help others. So without wanting to get too cliche about this and too hokey cokey, basically what it means is the dark times in our life is when we look within for that source of our true light, our true expression, our spiritual essence, the sun. And that sun is a connection to one and everyone, or the one, if you want to say. So it's important to connect now to people because it's sun in Libra, right? Libra is out about other people, and it's finding ourselves in the engagement. It's finding maybe ourselves or losing ourselves in that engagement. That's the other side of Libra, which is why the sun is weak in Libra. But it's also maybe about finding ourselves in the other. Now, as the planets, as you can see here, Venus, Mercury, and the sun all move into Scorpio in November, we're then moving into a stronger position in a way. And it's less of a focus on others and negotiation and compromise, and maybe having lost ourselves in the compromise, and more now about reconnecting within ourselves into our depths, really, in Scorpio. And again, it's moving into the depths of winter for most on the planet. So that's literally the case. But even if it's not that case, it's a case of energetically moving within to find that strength, to dig deep, as it were. Now, there's an interesting thing going on here when Venus exchanges with Mars, because Mars will return to Taurus, sidereal Taurus, by mid-November. So Mars re-enters Taurus on November 13th. And at that point, because Venus is continuing to transit through Scorpio, Mars's sign, until December 5th, really for the last part of November. Therefore, we're having an exchange going on between Venus in Scorpio and Mars in Taurus. They're in each other's signs. So that's actually helpful, mostly. It means that they are maybe forced to negotiate, but there's also a possibility here, a passionate mix of the two quote unquote gender planets, Mars and Venus. And so it's like putting Mars in Scorpio and then putting Venus in Taurus. So there can be some benefit from this. It's complicated also, and for certain signs. And by the way, I will release the sign-based forecast as I do every month, so you can watch yours and see how it plays out more specifically for you. But generally in the world, I think there is a potential here by the end of November, despite the dark times we've had up until now. From November, mid-November onwards, there could be an ability here to sort of negotiate with these two planets. Having said that, Mars is still retrograde in Taurus, and there's a lot of backtracking. There's a lot of reconsidering the basic things in life, even. There's a potential here over the winter, as we know, that we can see more blackouts, we can see more challenges around resources and the economy and all of that. That's Mars in Taurus retrograde. And so energy supplies and all of that could be challenged because Mars is energy, and in Taurus, which is about supplying resources, then literally supplying energy and resources to households might be meeting with a lot of setbacks and delays throughout this whole period, October 30th to January 12th. So let's go through the moon phases now for the month of November. We have had, or we will have had this. I'm recording on this on the 21st of October, so we haven't had it yet, but we're moving into it, and you might be feeling it throughout this whole period. The eclipse in Libra, a partial solar eclipse on the 25th of October at 7 degrees of sidereal Libra. If you have, again, any planets there, if your birthday is anywhere around that time on the 25th of October, this is an important time for you. But that itself opens up what is called an eclipse window, a 2-week window of a lot of uncertainty, because eclipses show change. And whenever there's change, we feel uncertain, and a lot of urgency. And so I get this all the time leading up to eclipses, where I get a lot more emails and people contacting me for readings and wanting to know what the hell is going on. And this kind of sense of urgency, I need to make a decision like now. And the advice is always from astrologers, like not to necessarily make any important decisions during the eclipses. So from the 25th of October to the 8th of November, especially. And the reason for that is not that it's a bad thing necessarily. It's just that, you don't really know all of the facts and figures, even just practically. Eclipses, remember, might reveal things, but they're just as likely to obscure things, to hide things. And so, although things are lining up as the sun, moon, the earth, the eclipse points, the nodes of the moon all line up in one line, and everything can be like you can join all the dots. That's great for many great insights on the one hand, but again, on the other hand, there's literally in this obscuring the sun and then the moon. Now, because it's starting with the new moon solar eclipse and it's leading to a full moon total lunar eclipse on November 8th, it's building in intensity throughout that whole period, the beginning of November. So we're going to feel it intensely. And especially around this eclipse on November 8th, we're going to feel this a lot. So here's the chart, the North and South Indian style, North on the left, South on the right. And you'll see here that the moon is conjunct Uranus, almost by exact degree. And opposite, we have Mercury involved in this as well, and the sun at the same degree. We have the nodes very close by, which means it is a total lunar eclipse on November 8th. And we have Mars, the ruler of this moon, retrograde, hanging out between two signs, at the edge of two signs. This happens to be the US Mars at 0 degrees of Gemini. So natally, they have Mars for the independence chart at 0 degrees Gemini. It's now moving retrograde on 0 degrees Gemini. And it's a total lunar eclipse in Aries, Mars's sign. And this is the time when they're having midterm elections. So this is explosive, and this is unpredictable and volatile, highly volatile. We have a square from Saturn that's continuing that theme of squaring the two nodes now, Aries, Rahu, North Node, Libra, Ketu, South Node, squaring Saturn in Capricorn. So there's this tension point here with these both of the eclipses, Libra eclipse on the 25th of October and that lunar eclipse on November 8th. There's a real tension point that we're reaching now into November that is going to reveal a lot of things, but also obscure a lot of things, hide a lot of things away, and change a lot of things. More than anything, this is a change point. There's going to be so much that happens on this day. The fact that it is the midterm elections in the US and how that impacts not just the US, but the whole world and the decisions that are made there. The economy and all of that, of course, because of Venus being involved and Libra, and the war situation and the developing war, and you might say a world war, which is, you might say, already developed, but we're just not calling it that yet. That's the North Node exaggerating, distorting, increasing Aries, the god of war, and the Venus reducing with Ketu, the South Node, the comforts of life, the Venus type things, the economy challenged. So this is a real turning point, basically, this eclipse, and a revelation, but also a lot of change and unexpected and volatile change in the markets, in so many other ways, and in terms of natural disasters as well, possible around the world. Seismic activity is not unusual around eclipses, but especially when it's conjunct Uranus in Aries and Mars is retrograde in Gemini. Gemini is an air sign, remember? So with Mars there stationing, going retrograde now over the natal US Mars, there can be some. This is my worry about this, is that the Mars means that the US just gets more and more involved in the war in Ukraine. And I say more involved and very deliberately. So without wishing to get into the politics of the US or any of that, there's quite clearly a world war at the moment, and we're just not calling it that. We're just not calling it that, but we will at some point. And this is where it could really escalate. So that's the full moon. It's going to be intense, even if we don't look at world war situations and all of that, if we don't look at the economy, and if you just hide in your hovel and sort of not want to deal with any of these things, you can do that, of course, but you will emotionally feel this on November 8th. And so it's important to be still as much as possible, to keep very simple routines so that, you're not doing anything about the urgency you feel, because likely the urgency is misplaced or inappropriate in any kind of rational context. So perhaps, that thing that you feel you need to do, you might not need to do. Maybe you do, but certainly I would sit with this and be as still as possible around this period. Then the next major lunation is the new moon in Anuradha, is the lunar mansion. By the way, before we move on from the full moon, I mentioned this in previous videos, but basically the full moon and eclipse on November 8th is occurring in the Bharani lunar mansion in Aries, which is symbolized by a vulva. So it's all about birth and death. It's ruled by Yama, the god of death. And so the whole theme around this, of course, is about birth and death and major life and death situations, and literally things like that in terms of the abortion ruling in the US. And again, the US having midterms at this time means that it's coming around again, because this lunar mansion is where we saw the solar eclipse in April of this year, 2022. So it triggered that issue already. And now it's coming to a full moon in this lunar mansion. There's a resolution here. This is something that's going to be revealed at this time. So the new moon then at the end of the month of November is November 23rd, the day that Jupiter stations direct. I'm going to talk about that now in a minute, is an important one as well. So let's not bypass this one, because it's very important that the moon is new, 7 degrees of sidereal Scorpio. Mars is still retrograde and it's opposite. It's exchanging with Venus, as I mentioned. You can see here Mars in Taurus, Venus in Scorpio, so they're exchanging signs. This adds strength for sure to this moon, which would otherwise be just a debilitated new moon, a dark moon that's in its weakest sign. So you might say, well, actually, this is a very dark time, even into the end of November. And again, not necessarily literally for you wherever you are on the planet, but very much energetically, figuratively, we're looking at a very dark time in our history. However, there is compensating factors here. Like I said, the fact that Mars and Venus are swapping signs, and it's like putting Mars in Scorpio and Venus in Taurus. And even if you didn't do that and you leave them where they are, both these planets, Mars and Venus, are the two planets that help the moon out of its weakness. So there are usually two or three sometimes planets that help debilitated planets out. And in this case, there are only two because there are no exalted planets in Scorpio. So we're kind of not having that, upliftment in a way. But there's definitely compensations here. And that is Mars and Venus. What's Mars? Mars is taking action. And although we have to react instead of maybe be proactive because it's retrograde, and we can certainly go back and find strength within us and find strength in the things that we used to find strength in. That's Mars retrograde. That'll help the mood. And we can also tap into Venus, which is about relationships, which is about comforts, which is about whatever resources that we do have access to. These are the two things, the main things that help our mind. Nutrition is one thing, for example, which Venus and Taurus is all about. Good nutrition helps the mind more than anything, or more than you might imagine. And people bypass that, without thinking too much about it. But basically, good nutrition is a basic need that everybody has on the planet. And if you don't have it, you're not going to be well. But then the other thing, Mars and Scorpio, is about tackling our issues, dealing with our problems, overcoming our demons, as it were. And that's also obviously helpful for the mind. And that we want to go there and deal with it and overcome them, that we don't want to avoid them and allow those darker themes to kind of fester away in the dark without having really looked at them properly. That just makes it worse. So those two planets now, Venus and Mars, are helping out this new moon. This new moon phase on the 23rd of November is also aspected, a trinal aspect from Jupiter, which is stationing on this day in Pisces. Now, this is important. So we have a kind of new beginning in a way for this new moon. And that's the eclipse. I'm not going to go over the eclipses again or the midterms. This is Jupiter stationing direct. So this new moon on November 23rd is an important one. Again, it's in the sign of Scorpio, sidereal Scorpio. So it's in the depths of the darkness. And when you think about Scorpio and what it's all about, and a new moon especially, it's about planting seeds in that darkness. And again, without being cliche or trite about it, basically, when you're at your wit's end, when you are at the end, where you're even imagining that kind of scenario, then you are at the same time planting new seeds for something better. And although those seeds don't sprout for some time, they will sprout. And it's about trusting that process and, moreover, having faith in that process. And that's what Jupiter is all about. And this is where Jupiter comes in. It's a really important time throughout October, November, and these eclipses and this new moon by the end of November to tap into Jupiter as it stations and holds in place, apparently, and then slowly moves forward in Pisces, sidereal Pisces. So this is a time to really reach out for Jupiter, for hope, for a new hope in the depths of the darkness of this period. And what is Jupiter in Pisces? Well, it's about hope and, it's about connection to something more mystical and all of that. But practically, it's also about just connecting and whatever we have reconnected with, to find that we can bring those plans forward, to find we can reach out more in more hopeful ways, and think about the things that give our life meaning and purpose, and the things we've been mulling over a lot in the last few months in Pisces. And again, I'll do another video on how each sign is impacted by these specifically, but generally Jupiter in Pisces is, although sometimes maybe pie in the sky and not realistic or down to earth, there is a need to connect to even something that is pie in the sky right now, because it's a much better situation reaching for something that's more hopeful, even if it's not realistic, than just being in the dark without a sense of any light at the end of the tunnel. So reach for that at this time. I would say reach for Jupiter in Pisces, reach for that hope, that connection to something deeper beyond even this life. whatever that might be for you, however you might access it. Again, I'll go through sign by sign in another video, and how you access it is very individual. So that is November. It's quite an interesting month, as every month is, you might say. But it's a dark time, sure. And it's a time that we really must connect in to something within us, that spark of light within us, and share that with others as well. That's, I think, a really important part. Before I leave you, I just want to mention that the magazine will be out in December for patrons. The digital copy will be available for all patrons, and then the physical copy of the magazine will be available for the patrons on the $10 tier, as well as those that I mentor. So it's a Dasha special, which again means literally is a Sanskrit word to mean circumstance, and it is how we progress the chart in the Indian tradition, apart from the transits. So whether it's sign-based progressions or planetary cycles. So we have articles by Edith Hathaway. We have Marianne Jacuzzi, myself, and Barry Rosen having written these articles about dashas, the different ways we can approach dashas. A couple of readers and patrons who have shared their personal stories about their own dashas, their own circumstances, and also a 2023 timeline, a very easy to follow timeline where I write about each of the months and forecast each month, and include an ephemeris and transit guide and an overview of 2023. I'm not going to go into that here. I'll do other videos, and of course I'll do a special 2023 forecast and predictions videos for patrons. So if you'd like to sign up as a patron, then you can just go again to timelineastrology.com or patreon.com/timelineastrology, and you get all of that content and much, much more. So again, thank you for watching. If you could leave a comment, if you have a comment, even if it's just a TKS, thank you. If it's just a question, if you have a question, feel free to post your questions. I love to get questions. And hit the like button and subscribe. And again, thank you. And I wish you the very best for the month of November.